All right, good. My name is Mayawa Kilanko, and I'll be your host for today. We're planning to have tops 2 hours of conversation and of great transforming conversation. And I believe that from tonight's conversation, we're going to spark a lot of positive change, and hopefully, we're going to bring about transformation, not just to people who just listen, but our communities as regards to mental health. So now I asked randomly at the first time, and I think I'm going to need everyone to just let me know where you're watching from, where you're listening from, and what time it is. I think I'll do that again. Deborah, you don't have to. I have a few comments already from there, so I think we can take up those times. So everyone here, just let me know what time it is where you're watching, viewing this from, and your name also. I'll take that again, your name, your city, and the city where you're viewing this from and what time it is over there. So please, I would love if we can start dropping that in the comment section as we begin. Right, tonight, okay. Okay, right. So I'll just run it back again. Deborah Omage, 12 p.m. in name. It's 9:30 p.m. in India, 7 p.m. in Kenya, and I can see the name is 5:02. Yeah, Nigeria. In London, it's just past 5. Accra, 4:30 p.m. 9:03 in Pakistan. Benjamin from Nasarawa State, thank you. Right. Well, thank you, Gabriel. 5 p.m. So taking that through. Kaduna, Nigeria. Thank you, Deborah, for joining me. Well, I'm still seeing a few people coming in, so we're going to quickly move into our first. Amir, it's good to have you. All right. Okay, that's 7:05 in Uganda. Well, it's 8 p.m. in Dubai. And yes, Divine Grace, welcome. Thank you from Abuja. All right. I think this is most of the lots we can take from comments. Thank you for letting me know where you're watching from. So a few things I just want to pinpoint while we begin. I said this earlier, and I just want to go over it again. We're hoping that this conversation already picks off in the next 2 hours. That was at 5 p.m., but we're hoping that we can have a great conversation. For me, my desire is not just to have a random conversation. My desire is that we are able to have a transformative conversation, a conversation that leads us towards transformation and that can influence our communities, and people around us. So it's going to be an amazing time. And I really ask that while you have questions, you can drop them in the comment box, just in the comment section. And also if you have, and then if you have questions during the Q&A, just drop them in the comment box. And also, I really love if you can have take down notes, because at the end of the time, I'm going to open up, for conversations while we all, tell us, what we have either picked from the meeting. But for me, again, I'm just reiterating to say over and over again that is beyond just having people gather at random. It's for us to be able to preempt conversations that will lead towards mental health transformation around our society. And as the theme is to awaken or awakens the consciousness of mental health around our space. We're moving on to our next agenda. As time has already picked, I'm going to be inviting the founder, of the MHT to join in for the conversation. Also, during the conversation, you hear me from time to time, call Stella's name. Stella is going to be my technical director as the conversation goes on, because we're going to have slides. A few things are going to be popping up as the conversation swells. So please do well to stick, in, and like I said, continue to take your notes as we go on. Please also make sure that all our mics are mute so that we can, hear everyone through the conversation. All right, so this is my bit for tonight's talk. I'm going to be handing us over to Deborah Omage, the CEO, founder of MHT, the mental health transformation. And before she speaks, I'll give you a little background. I'm not going to read her bio because I have a background on our speaker. Deborah Omage is someone who is very passionate about mental health. And I'll tell you, our first meeting, we met at an event for the yellow fever vaccination. And Deborah walked up to me and said, we're supposed to talk about mental health in this conversation. I'm like, I didn't know that. I didn't get that prompt. And because I was running out of time, I said, you know what? I give you some time on the radio. And she's like, perfect. Can I have your number? And she was so short to keep to that. And that's how our relationship or meeting had begun. And from that, I really wish I could describe it. She walked up and said, I'm supposed to talk about mental health. When am I coming up? Like, take it easy. Take it easy. And she has that platform right now to do that. So I'm going to stop talking and invite Miss Deborah Omage to open up the conversation. Thank you. Over to you, Ms. Omage.
Hi, everybody. Can we see me and hear me? Hello? Can anyone see me and hear me?
Yes, we can.
Audible.
Okay, great. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you, Maya, for that introduction. Indeed, why not start and talk about mental health in all conversations? Well, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're joining from. And first of all, I want to say welcome to AWAKEN, a global youth mental health conversation. So for everyone and to everyone that has joined this conversation, I want to say thank you for choosing to anchor your time here at this moment. As I look out for this virtual gathering, I am moved by the sheer scale of the community we've been able to build together for this evening. Tonight we have over 92 organizations present and 35 countries represented. I hope that you let that sink in for a moment. Something that I realized along the line was that this is truly no longer just an isolated campaign. It is slowly becoming a global ecosystem. We are here. I want to believe we all, agree to what I'm about to say. We are here because we refuse to let the geography of our births dictate the quality of our psychological survival. I spent a significant amount of time as someone who practices in the public health space to think, what does awareness truly mean for mental health? And if we're being completely honest with ourselves, awareness has become a very comfortable and familiar word. We see it, in social media campaigns, in hashtags here and there, especially on world days that we choose to commemorate mental health. And in as much as those things are necessary, I always ask myself an even different question. Has the noise of awareness tricked us into believing that we are actually creating infrastructure? The most uncomfortable truth, if you ask me, in our generation is that young people are more aware about mental health than any other generation in our history of, the human race altogether. We now know the vocabulary for some, better in some part of the world than others. We can easily identify when someone is having anxiety, for some depression and trauma here and there. And despite the fact that we know these names, millions of people still have absolutely no idea on where to go to when they struggle with their mental health. According to the Lancet Commission on Global Mental Health, it says that about 75% of mental health conditions starts by the age of 24. Just think about the data. Now, most times we're told at those ages where it starts before the age of 24, mostly around the adolescent age. That, we're just acting up, it's just adolescent drama. We're just trying to rebel and just, show that now we are growing. But the truth is that at those moments in a person's life, that is where we either lose the battle or we win the battle for a young person's future. And even with all of this, how do the infrastructure and the institutions respond? Most times when a young person has the ability or gotten the courage to speak up about their mental health, we tell them be strong, or we tell them it's okay, or the most we do is we just put together a one-off seminar to let them know that yes, we see you, and it's time to wrap it up, and then you move forward. But that's exactly is why we created Awaken, because it's time for us to move past the one-off awareness events. And since the inception of what we titled as Awaken at Mental Health Transformation, we have taken our time to ensure that we don't just teach people awareness, we actually take them through an experiential learning phase. And over time, since the past 4+ years that we've been running the Awaken program, we came together and put together a comprehensive youth mental health literacy guide titled Awaken. And in as much as it's a beautiful resource, we don't want it to be something that just sits on the shelf like every other PDF. Awakening was truly brought up from an uncomfortable and a very disheartening state in terms of how young people are taught and respond to their mental health. We have learned over time that we need practical literacy, we need systemic language, and we need accessible, decentralized support systems. Above all, we need to normalize prevention and not just reactive care crisis management. So mental health should definitely not begin at the edge of a breakdown. Mental health for young people, we see it in our everyday lives, in the schools that we attend, in the communities that we're part of. And so it should be normalized in those settings as well. One of the most profound things that I've definitely learned while leading this organization is that conversations do not automatically guarantee care. Sometimes we are so busy celebrating the fact that people are talking that we actually forget to audit the reality on ground. We forget to ask, are our youth actually safer? Are they more supported? Are they economically and emotionally equipped after the conversation ends? Tonight is our collective attempt to bridge that gap. We're here to ask the necessary questions. How do we translate the policies that have been made, and even those that we're yet to see, into structures where young people can function and feel safe on a day-to-day basis? How do we integrate emotional well-being into school curricula so that it is treated as part of our foundational wellness and not just an afterthought, as usually the case is? Since the inception of MHC, we've actually been able to reach over 9,000 young people. That is through awareness programs, through school clubs, through education trainings for teachers and the likes. And if there's one thing we've learned over time since we've been able to reach that number, it is that young people do not lack the capacity to heal. They lack the environment that knows how to respond. So, to the 35 countries represented, to the over 240 people that registered for this event, and the 92 organizations gathered here, my hope is that Awaken does not leave and does not end when you click leave meeting tonight. I hope this is not just another webinar that you cross off to mark or commemorate Mental Health Awareness Month. I hope that it disrupts the way you view your work. I hope it forces you to look at prevention with a sense of urgency. I hope it sparks radical and borderless collaborations across our respective spaces. And to every single young person listening to my voice right now, if you remember absolutely nothing from this conversation tonight, I want you to hold on to one truth, that there's strength in seeking support, there is strength in community, and there's immense revolutionary strength in refusing to believe that mere survival is the highest version of what your life can become. Awareness is truly never the final destination. Building a healthier and just systems for young people is the destination. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Deborah, for those kind words. Please, can we, yes, that's how we do our close. Can we just send in some emojis claps and hearts and say thank you. Thank you for those words. Some things that you said that stuck out for me, was how that you spoke about that you hope that tonight's conversation disrupts our work and we come into realizing that we should build proper systems, together and 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 be of support, strengthen each other and support, and not just choose to survive, but also choose, to be a community and stand for each other. Thank you so much. Before we proceed into our next speaker, or with our next speaker today, please, I would like us to do a few renamings. I would like you to check your name and look at what your name is saying. I'm seeing several Deborah Omages. I'm going back to the comments and I'm seeing several Deborah Omages. So in case you want to give out $1 million, the real Deborah Omage we're giving it to, right? So please help me do that. Just go back to check your name and see if your name is written properly. Thank you so much so that we can get into that. We're going to move on to our keynote address. Our keynote is taken by Diana Cho. Diana Cho is the first Bonbui Chinese American and who founded Later to Strangers, also known as L2S, at age 14 after diagnosis of bipolar disorder and a blinding eye condition, which nearly ended her life. Today, Later to Strangers is the largest global youth mental health NGO, impacting over 660 people across 72 countries. Under her leadership, Later to Strangers published the world's first Youth for Youth mental health guidebook and established the first toll-free 247 Pan-African mental health hotline. Diana has been honored by 2 United States presidents at the White House and is a Princess Diana Legacy Award winner. She has also provided expert testimony to FDAs and a Princeton honors graduate and former master's NASA psychiatrist. And Diana completed her MBA at the University of Oxford as the prestigious school scholar. So with another round of applause, we're going to be welcoming Diana Cho to give us the keynote speech.
Hi everyone! I am so glad to be here today to help open up the AWAKEN conference. What an incredible, energetic room, with youth advocates and students and nonprofit leaders, educators, health professionals, all of you and us gathered here together for youth mental health. That is what change looks like. So, hi, I'm Diana Chao. I'm the founder and executive director of Letters to Strangers. I started L2S, which is the shorthand for Letters to Strangers, back when I was 14 years old. When I was 13, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and then I later on survived a suicide attempt. It was writing these letters to no one, to these strangers, that helped me realize my own voice and that I have a story worth telling and ultimately a life worth living. So that's why I started Letters to Strangers. But over the years, I've realized now, and it's been over 12 years since I've been running Letters to Strangers. Today, we are the largest global youth mental health NGO, but that's not something that happened by accident. See, the thing is that most mental health organizations are not for youth or run by youth, and that was the gap that L2S and places like here are trying to change. And the reason why it resonates with people is because the peer-to-peer model isn't just a workaround, it's something that's foundational to the way that we can actually create cultural change. Having a peer connection, it's something that allows us to bust that stigma, to bust those myths, and then ultimately get people to the support and the awareness and education that they need for a better and healthier future for everyone. That's the point of today's event, right? Young people are not waiting for permission. With the panel's lived experience and just Deborah sharing more about the ecosystem, and then there's the Yellow Tulip Project, everybody being involved is showcasing how we still have the power and autonomy to do something in this world that often feels so scary and overwhelming. We can still do something. And sometimes I try to remind myself that that is in and out of itself a reason to stay hopeful. Letters to Strangers was something that I created as a teenager, but it's definitely not something that I could have done alone. And I'm so grateful for everybody who cares so deeply about this cause, whether it's because of something that you went through personally, like I did, or because you know someone who has gone through these very difficult things and you chose to care. It's because of that type of caring that we were able to achieve some of the things that we have. And it's not just about what we were able to achieve, it's also about what the whole field of youth mental health has been able to do together over this last decade. Just to give you a quick overview, Letters to Strangers over our last decade or so has directly worked with over 660,000 plus young people. And we've exchanged over 65,000 letters with hundreds of chapters in 72 countries all over, including an affiliate here at Mental Health Transformation, which we're so excited about. But one of the reasons why all of this has had such resonance with people is because people have started to understand and realize the power of the youth advocate, the power of the person who with lived experience, who understands that they bring expertise to the table. What I always say is that we're not just as subjects of study or subjects of funding or subjects of being platformed for a one-time event and then never acknowledged again. We are subject matter experts of our own right. And so that's what I really hope everyone can take home today. You know, I built Letters to Strangers when I was living under the poverty line. I'm a first generation immigrant to the US. I was born and raised in a Chinese autonomous ethnic minority village that was the poorest province in all of China. So I grew up in that village, and then when I moved to the US, everything was very different from what I knew. But that also taught me how much impact we and all of us can do, regardless of our circumstances. And that's not to say you shouldn't put yourself and your own well-being first. That is so important because you really cannot pour from an empty cup. But what I mean is the grassroots model is something that really creates change. We don't have to be some big, huge government-funded NGO to actually be able to make a difference. You don't have to be a multi-million-dollar brand to be able to make a difference. At Letters to Strangers, even as our budget grew, we were able to maintain a cost of $1, $1 roughly, per person directly impacted. That is actually relatively achievable in the grand scheme of things. We're not talking about $1,000. We're not talking about 100,000. We're talking about $1. And I know even that on some days can just feel impossible. But my point is, we all have to start from somewhere, and there's nowhere too small. Look, this whole moment really matters. We know that last year, 2025, just saw unprecedented humanitarian aid cuts. 81 NGOs closed at least one office in just 2 months. And I know across the UN system, every single one of their agencies got at least a 25% cut. Many received a higher cut than that. We also got affected at Letters to Strangers. But what it showed is that when massive top-down programs fail, it's not other massive systems that step in and step up. It's the local communities. It's the people like you and I on the ground. And so that's why it's so important that we are gathered here today to move forward from just recognizing these challenges to then building real peer support networks. You don't need credentials or some big budget to start. You need hope. And that is something that is invaluable, immeasurable, something that can only come from people surrounded by others like you who understand the importance of this mission. Heck, I started Letters to Strangers with a simple program that just needed stationery, a writing tool, and an envelope. And look where we are now. So we start with our communities, not above it. We are with you. We do this together. And that's what it's all about. Everyone has a story worth telling, but not everyone gets the chance to tell others what their story was. And so for those of us lucky enough to have that chance, let's make sure more people are able to do so too. I'm so excited for the conference today and so grateful for the Letters to Strangers affiliation with MHT as well. Can't wait to see where you guys go next, and just thank you for having me.
For her, for what she said, I picked a lot from what she said. It was more than just a mere message to us. She was very direct. A few things that she said and I'll run you back without any order. You don't have to be a global organization, or a big funded with $1 billion to make change. You can begin to make change with those little things, and most importantly, just your availability, around. Another thing that she said that I think we should all go back home with, and this also as based. Sorry, please, can we all, be conscious about muting our mic? And this just moves away from just being a mental health conversation. I think this goes to our lives generally, but to stick narrow it down to mental health. So you do not, she said something that I wrote down and I have to go with. It says you don't need a big budget, you need hope to start. And this goes to everything that we do, and what I'll really say about this is one of the things we can do to awaken consciousness of mental health is how we build our communities, how we behave at the office, the dreams that we're willing to start. These things can channel and provide better support systems for people, being a better co-worker, at work, being a better boss, being a better, client or subordinate. It's going to help us, build better and bigger, awareness on making the idea of the conversation around mental health. We're going to be having another speaker, quickly as we move on. This is our featured global news segment. We're going to be having an amazing person with us. We just going through her bio once again just shows that all it takes is for us to step out there to make the world a better place. She's already on my screen, so I'm quickly going to get him to read, her bio. We have Suzanne Fox is going to join us quickly. Suzanne Fox is a co-founder of Yellow Tulip, the Yellow Tulip Project in 2016, and served as the executive director until June 2003. Currently, she is the director of the Global Initiatives and a board member. She advises on community partnerships and exhibits like I Am More, Facing Stigma, Using Creative Thinking to Drive Social Impact. Advocacy is supported by 30 years of intercultural consulting and a 2024 MSE in global mental health from the University of Edinburgh. Her research explores cross-cultural stigma and strength-based mental health approaches grounded in for global collaboration. While this is the bit I'll take from her, her bio with a round of applause. Please can you help me welcome Suzanne Fox to the platform? Thank you. Over to you.
Hey, hi. Can people hear and see me?
Yes, we can. I can hear.
Okay. This is so amazing. Everyone who ever hears me talk, I always say it takes a vital village to make change, and to be here in Maine in the United States with people from Nigeria, Kenya, Pakistan, India, Dubai, all over the globe. It's so inspiring. And I wanted to start with this quote by Gandhi: be the change you want to see in the world. It's so poignant for what we're trying to do today. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Mental Health Transformation, for bringing change makers from all across the globe together for this such an important conversation. And my hope, as Deborah said before, that this is not a one and done, that this is the beginning of ongoing conversations, that we keep moving forward, we keep sharing ideas, we keep collaborating, because that's the only way that change happens. And I'm thinking about movements in the United States, the women's movement, the civil rights movement, the gay rights movement, the workers' movement. Nothing came from the top down. It was the women on the streets holding their signs, bringing change. So we are bringing change to the way we talk about mental health, and it's so important. So I have the privilege, if you want to just go on to the next slide, I think it was Deborah or Diana said that there's a lot of talk about youth mental health, but not a lot of listening to young people. And I've had the incredible privilege of working with amazing young people, amazing change makers that have so much to say, have so much to bring into the conversation, and how urgent it is that we have intergenerational conversations. It's such a privilege to learn from young people. And when our Surgeon General in the United States declared a youth mental health crisis in the United States a couple of years ago, there was all these talking heads talking about youth mental health. And never did they have one young person talking about their own experience. So we need to listen. We need to work together. So this is such an exciting conference. I'm so happy to be part of it. And I just want to quickly talk about my story, starting the Yellow Tulip Project. My daughter, Julia, if you want to go on to the next slide. My daughter, Julia, was 15 years old, and she had just lost her two best friends to suicide. She was struggling alone with her own depression, her own self-harm, her own suicidal thoughts. And it was shut down. It was quiet. She was alone. There was nobody to talk about this at that time. After her best friend took her life, her school said 2 days later, now that everything's back to normal, and my daughter, just like Diana, just like Deborah, just like these other change makers said, that's not okay. That's not normal. We need to do something. So what we did was a mother-daughter duo. We didn't come from a lot of experience in nonprofit management. We just knew we had to do something. What we did was bring people together. It takes a community for change. Diana was talking about hope. The yellow tulip is the flower of hope. We came together, and you want to go on to a next couple slides, slide 7. It started, like Diana said, with one letter. It started for us with one garden in Portland, Maine, where I live, if you want to go on to the next slide. And the simple act, so many people struggle alone with their own mental health. Stigma is the number one factor that keeps people from getting the help that they need. So what if we brought people together during Mental Health Awareness Week, Global Mental Health Awareness Day in October, plant a garden, get our hands dirty together, and music and speeches and poetry and beautiful opportunities to connect. So you realize you're not alone. So we had this beautiful event in one small city in one state in the United States. Now we have hundreds of thousands of bulbs have been planted all across the United States, all across the world, and it's simple. And again, it's all about young people using their voices for change. It was never about my daughter and I. It was always about bringing people together. We created a youth program, a youth ambassador program, and young people are stepping in onto the next slide. They're using their voices. They're bringing our message to their schools. Nobody, if you want to go on to the next slide or two, nobody can do this work alone. So you need young people, but you need adult allies who get it and can understand and work together. And so it's been so inspiring for me, having started it 10 years ago with my daughter, just the two of us, to watching this spread. This is a young woman who brought it from her middle school to her high school, to her university, to all across. She's just a change maker, and it's the ripple effect for change. So I just want to quickly show a little bit more of it's simple. It's gardens, it's coming together, it's sharing, it's storytelling, and how impactful the simple things can be in bringing change to our communities. So what we do is, if you want to go on to the next thing, is like I said, we plant these gardens. And then once the gardens are planted, well, you don't really get to see them much because the plants are down in below the earth. But then we have a hope bench with mental health resources. Go on to the next slide. We have mental health resources so people know that they're not alone. And all of these resources are written by young people for young people. So young people can say, like, this is what I do to take care of myself. This is what I do to take care of myself, and learn from each other. And it's just so, for me, inspiring to see the change that's happening every day by young people getting involved and using their voices for change. It's so exciting. So again, here's just some photos of some of the gardens. I love this one. They spell out hope. And again, intergenerational. These tiny children are 3 and 4 years old. At this age, we're not having conversations about mental health awareness, but we are having conversations about self-care. And sometimes you won't feel okay, and it's okay to ask for help. And just beginning conversations at early ages is so important. Again, so just a few more photos of the communities that come together to share their stories, to remind people that they're not alone. And as Deborah said, or Diana said, that asking for help is a sign of strength, not weakness, and how important it is to remind people you're not alone. So the other thing that we did beyond the gardens is these beautiful interactive photo exhibits, because you can't see mental health, you can't see mental illness, you don't know what's going on under the surface. So this photo exhibit, if you just want to go for a few more photos, it's called I Am More Facing Stigma. And you have these beautiful, powerful photographs. And I have mental illness, but mental illness doesn't have me. And it's trying to change perceptions of what mental illness looks like. And so we have these traveling exhibits, they're in schools, they're in libraries, they're in community centers. And then after we did that exhibit, we had a second one called Young Men Moving Mountains. And it's specific to men's mental health. And we have these incredible, bold and brave. You just want to go to the next slide, or even the next slide here. This is, I love this. You won't be any less of a man if you express your emotions. Society wants me to be silent, but it's good to normalize talking about our feelings. It's okay to talk. Don't be afraid. And then they have their outlet. And so many younger boys have seen these photo exhibits and look at these powerful messages, these beautiful outlets, and they realize that they're not alone and it's okay. So the simple act of storytelling, of community-based programming, of nature-based programming, it's simple, and yet it's so needed. And what's so important is that it's all driven by young people. So I, for one, am so excited to be part of this beginning conversation. I hope it goes on and we keep connecting, keep sharing. If anybody wants to know anything more about the Yellow Tulip Project, I think if you go on to the next slide, there's my information. Nope, next slide. Yeah, and here, but I met Deborah because we both presented at a global mental health conference in Cape Town. I was calling in from Cambodia. She was calling in from Nigeria. And since then, that was a year ago, and we meet monthly and we share ideas. She's brought the Yellow Tulip Project to her ambassador program in Nigeria. It's so inspiring to see what good work can happen when we collaborate and learn from each other. And thank you so much for letting me be part of this great conversation.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. Please, can we just give her a round of applause? Thank you so much. And when I say thank you, I'm not saying thank you for speaking here. I'm saying thank you for what you do. And listening to you speak, you could hear the passion from her voice. I could hear the passion from your voice. Your speaker is working, right? You can able to hear the passion from her voice, and really the work she has put in. I've been in the space of having conversations about what people do because of my job, and you can literally tell from the nuances of their speech how much committed they are. And I'm very, very glad to have you in the world, Suzanne, and I'm sure that the earth is happy to have you planting those trees. What you do with your daughter, and I'm happy to see that there's recovery around you, and it makes a lot of sense. I'm taking a lot of notes. And I think I need to go to Twitter to copyright some of my quotes that I'm naming here. She said something that I really love. And I added a few things that she said. She says, nobody can bring about change alone. And I'm putting that to say, nobody can bring about change alone. You need a whole community. You need to get that done. But most importantly, change starts with you. And that's something I really want us to take back home. While we talk about collaboration, while we talk about working together, as a team, as one big, global dot. I also want us to know that while we start up with the little that we have, we also really need to rely on our self-dependency, first of all, to be able to bring about change all by ourselves. This is not just some weird one-off conversation. It's us being able to, help the next person standing next to us, able to bring about rescues, a little, hey, hi. If you look at some of the things, I'm sure someone's like, these things that you're talking about just randomly brings about change. It's the hope, that we present to each other. It's hi, you have a great dress. It's the little games we have to do, the collaboration, working together, doing things together. I feel like I should be a speaker because I'm just running through, some of these things. But I'm just the host. I'm just the host. Don't get interested. So let's get into. We're going to be having a panel, discussion. But before we do that, I know that there are a lot of questions that are going to come up from this, panel discussion that we're going to be having. I want us to do a few things, and I want us to type down the comments. I know we're writing, but I want us to write down some of the things that we have learned, some of the silent things that have been said, or very loud, amplified things. And Diana strictly spoke about how much of hope can be in there, and the idea of just starting with the impression about truth. Mr. Maggie also went on to tell us about the numbers and how that little actions that we take, can bring about a better space, and how we can awaken the consciousness of mental health transformation, as she has already begun to do. So please, I want us to go to the comments, and drop what we have been able to pick up, from tonight's question. I'll give us about 2 minutes to have a minute rather to have that roll up, while I just allow us to digest some of the things that we have heard in this time space, and before I move on to the panel discussion. So I'm going to give us a few minutes and a few seconds to have that done. So please let us begin to have them roll out. Thank you. I'm yet to see our comments. I'm waiting for them to pop up so that I can proceed. I really want us, it's not just some cliche. I really want to know how far we're going with learning, and how far we're going with, with picking up some things that we're hearing today. We have to take up the comments, so I'm a very patient person. Very patient. Is the fruit of my life. So I'm waiting to see the comments. I'm not taking up my time, but I really would love to see what we've picked up from tonight's conversation. So I hope we're not all writing epistles, just a few things that we have learned. I'm hoping, so I'm going to read everything. I have a few more seconds to write about. We can drop that quickly. But your name, right? You've learned that asking for help is actually. Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you so much, Paul, for that. That's real sad. Thank you. Right. Let that roll for 30 more seconds. Now we get started. Okay. So we're going to get back into the conversation. I hope we enjoyed the little bit. Okay, so yeah, thank you for being patient with us. We're back into, I'm sure everybody can hear me now. If you can hear me, just give me a thumbs up. I think, yeah. Just give me a thumbs up to let me know that you can hear me. All right, so I'll read this also. My name is Grace from Kenya, currently working in Dubai. I'm a caregiver and motivational speaker. I encourage others to be the change that you would like to see in the world. We all have to start from somewhere. Your story matters, and the world is waiting for you. I've learned, this is Joseph Basi, I've learned that there is strength in seeking support community, and most especially asking for help is a sign of strength. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. You guys made the time worthwhile and the waiting worthwhile. I really like something that has been reiterated in the comments, and it's about the idea that asking for help is a sign of strength. I'll give you a quick story before I jump into the conversation. I run a radio show right here in Kaduna, and one of the shows that I host with a group of other on-air personalities is something we call For the Brothers, or Brothers for the Place. And it's a show that sticks to talk about the well-being of a man. And we had this conversation around mental health for men. And one of the conversations that we itemized was just a list where like 6 grown men in that studio. And we brought up one topic. The topic was men asking for help and men learning to cry. We started a conversation just briefly, and you needed to hear the influx of callers, grown men who could stay anonymous because it's radio. And they said, I would love you to talk about this next week. We had that conversation for 3 weeks. It's against broadcasting rules, but we had to have that conversation for 3 consecutive shows. And one thing that I saw was that a lot of people are, bleeding inside. And I think, just to reiterate that comment that was dropped, by several people, Grace did that. Basi, I saw that comment also by you, saying that it's okay. It's a sign of strength to say, I'm falling, I'm falling, in a ditch, and I really need help to survive. I'm getting information that my name has changed. My name is Maya Wakilanko still. I'm your host. I want to change that. I think I was telling us, the perk in the eye while there was something in my eyes. So I'm going to change that also, but I'll begin to go us into the conversation, quickly. So I'm going to be having our panel session. Our panel session is themed from awareness to action and thinking, prevention, literacy, and youth mental health support. I have 3, amazing guests. I have that will join us today. I have Parth, Sharma, I have Mr. Chime, Asonye, and I have Amisa Rashid also join us in the conversation. All right, so I'm going to quickly do a little bit of reading. So Parth, I hope I called your last name right, Parth Sharma. Yeah, I did. Thank you so much. So I'll just say it quickly. I'm sure Mr. Wagi is going to give me a bullet for this, but your name sounds like a Southern Kaduna name. Yeah, there's a name called Sharma. Yeah, so when I saw it, I'm like, do you have some Southern Kaduna roots? So Parth Sharma is an anti-colonial scholar and mad activist working to disrupt the mental health industrial complex and advance collective liberation. The scholarship emphasizes the need for reflective, aware, and intersectoral perspective in mental health. With extensive experience in critical global health, their previous work includes advising the World Health Organization on the Lancet Self-Care Series, serving on an expert panel for GOARN on anti-stigma guidelines and leading the Asia-Oceania region for global mental health peer network. Thank you so much, Mr. Parth Sharma, for joining us. You can unmute your mic to say hi while I introduce all the guests.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here.
That's the good evening and good night. I just said. All right, good evening also to you. All right, so also I have Mr. Chime Asonye. Thank you so much for just reading through your bio, and I was wondering how comes I never stumbled, physically with you. Mr. Chime Asonye is a public policy advisor and mental health advocate. Currently, he serves as the founder of the Nigerian Mental Health. His thoughtful leadership on psychosocial issues is featured in the Harvard Africa Policy Review and CNBC Africa and the World Economic Forum, amongst others. Previously, he advanced the United Nations global goals, first federally, serving as an associate for the Office of the Senior Special Assistant to the President of Nigeria on the UN Millennial Development Goals, and second, at the subnational level as the Senior Special Assistant to the Governor of Abia State, Nigeria, on UN Sustainable Development Goals. With a round of applause, please can we welcome Mr. Chime to the conversation. Please can you unmute your mic and say hi.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here today. And Oga, I'm waiting for you. I don't know how you haven't seen me. I'm around.
This Oga is talking about. Who is this Oga talking about?
Not you now.
Me? How? I'll find you. I'll find not that I have, because I'm seeing you. I'm like, we're looking for you in places. I'm definitely going to book you for some conversation as well as Mr. Parth. I have a radio series forced by Mr. Omage has poked me to always talk about mental health on my radio show. So this is me saying I have my guest list for like 2 months. All right, thanks so much, Mr. Chime, for joining me. So I also have with us Mr. Rashid, the renowned neuropsychologist and an advocate celebrated for driving systemic community-based mental health solutions across Africa. As founder and executive director of the Nivishi Foundation, she champions culturally sensitive care and decolonized mental health literacy. Her pioneering innovation includes Africa's first mental health comic book for youth and the Amisa GPT, an AI chatbot offering localized therapy support in Swahili and Czech. With a round of applause, please can we welcome Ms. Rashid with us today. All right, so please you can unmute your mic and say hi.
Hello, hi everyone. Good evening from Kenya. Happy to see all of you and eager for the conversation.
All right, I'm also very, very eager for this conversation. So I want to say that I have a very beautiful lineup. Mr. Wagi, I think you did a very good job. We found people who could fit into my energy for tonight's conversation. This was a very, very, very great job. So I'm going to open up the conversation and allow us to speak. We're going to have ladies first. Mr. Misha, please forgive me for calling your name last, but we're going to open up last. Please can we all continue to mute our mics? Thank you. And we're going to have in this order, we're going to have Ms. Amisa will go first on the roundtable conversations, and then I'll have Parth next, and Mr. Chime will always, cap it up whenever I just say to for all the panelists. So we'll always go by that round. All right, so starting up with this, the first question I have, and this goes to all our panelists today, is when you think about mental health today, and also listen to some of the things that have been shared here and some of the comments that have been dropped already, you can already perceive that there is an awareness, a consciousness of people who are devoted to knowing about mental health. But for you, whenever you hear about mental health, what is one shift you believe that is most urgently needed in the mental health space today? So whenever you hear about that, what's one urgent shift, something that you need, that that needs to begin to trail or pick up, that's needed most urgently in the mental health space today? I'll start with you, Mr. Rashid.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think one of the shifts that is needed when it comes to matters mental health is the context of mental health knowledge. Where do we all get our mental health knowledge from? Most of the time is from the Euro-American perspective. The knowledge, the data, the researches, even how mental illnesses are named are not from, like, I'm an African, are not from the African context. So when we are talking about mental health knowledge, who decides what mental health knowledge should look like? Should we adapt our language and our cultures and our context to the Euro-American perspective of mental health, or should it be adapted to our context? So I feel like there is a lot of stigma when it comes to matters mental health because we are rightly so to believe that it is imported to us. Of course, we know it is not imported and that our grandparents, the generations before, have been going through mental health issues using different languages, different healing methodologies. But at the moment, the main way in which we get the mental health knowledge is from the Euro-American perspective. And it actually shifts how we perceive mental health because it does not integrate with our culture. A good example, for us Africans, we are naturally loud. You go everywhere, we are loud, like you laugh and we're very hyperactive. Even our children are always playing all over. But if you go to a context that is not an African context, your child will be immediately diagnosed with ADHD or something of the sort. So that means that that context and that aspect of cultural sensitivity or where the person coming from or what we are used to has not been put to context. So it's like we are talking about mental health from a circle, and then we are trying to fit the circle that we are in to fit in a rectangle. Or to fit or to fit in a star, something of the sort. So what defines, so my thing when I'm thinking about mental health is who gets to tell us what mental health knowledge is and what voice do we have when driving the agenda, the local agenda, the global agenda around matters mental health. Understanding this will really help us actually localize and give more insight and acceptance of mental health and not just treat it as a stigma. Back to you.
Thanks so much for Ms. Rashid. I didn't even know my mic was on. I had to laugh because Sarah and like you have
Well, I think we lost you for a second, but should I go ahead?
Yes, you can. Yes, you
Okay,
can.
lovely. So I think I'm going to echo what Amisa said. I think before I even start talking about mental health, it's important for you to know where I'm coming from beyond just the introduction as well. So hi, everyone. My name is Parth. My pronouns are he, they. I'm a queer and a binary disabled mad person from India. There are parts of my identity that causing marginalization, which also inform my intersection lived experience. At the same time, when I'm coming from India, I'm a fourth generation academic. I am highly educated. I come from the class and caste privileged communities in India that have historically been oppressors and also are people with a lot of resources which are afforded towards them. It's important for you to know this context because, again, when we're thinking of our own countries, as all of you know, we are not monolithic representations of where we're coming from. And it becomes important to know what power we hold within the rooms like these, right? Echoing what Amisa also said, our perceptions of mental health have been borrowed from cisgendered, heterosexual, able bodied, Eurocentric perspectives. That means that a lot of the times what we understand as health and well being comes from knowledges that were created at the expense of us and our communities and through the oppression of us. When we think of mental health and youth mental health in particular, I think it becomes extremely important to decolonize mental health, but also to target what does decolonization mean, right? Do we just mean going back to culturally sensitive roots? Do we mean culturally adapting tools which are already created in the West? Or are we actively centering indigenous practices which are already present within our communities? Beyond this, I also think there's an important need to understand the shift between youth mental health from what it already is right now. For the longest time, youth mental health has represented this idea of understanding young people and adolescents to have no agency. And therefore, for adults and those who are within the mental health ecosystem, be it psychologists, psychiatrists, those who are in academia, those who are in the non-for-profit industry, or mental health advocates, to then provide some agency to young people. I think that's a big misnomer. Young people have always had agency and young people have always been empowered. It's just that we've not had portals to show their empowerment, specifically when it comes to mental health. And rarely is mental health when it comes to youth only about their age, right? I think when we think of all of our context, and Deborah had already covered that when she was giving a keynote, was that we often come into youth mental health from a firefighting response of when the crisis has already taken place. And because all the tools that are disposable are from the West, they are Eurocentric, they're cisgendered, we are again trying to adapt and fit in to what are some of the tools that are not applicable in our resources. What happens to young people who are going through poverty, homelessness, or going through the climate crisis, or going through a war, a genocide? What happens to people who are displaced? What happens to people who are discriminated against for being queer, for being trans? These models don't work. So then what works, right? So I think it's important for us to shift the way that we think of mental health first, to first move towards decolonization, and then actively recenter the conversation of youth mental health beyond just age, to start thinking about the systemic factors of oppression that cause these crises to take place to begin with. I think I'll pause here to hear what Chime has to say.
What's you, Chime? All right. Yes, I hope I have not. Chime, if you can hear me, Mr. Chime, if you can hear me.
Yes, I'm having a little bit of audio issues. I'll be right back. Let me resolve that.
Okay, I'm not sure what's happening, but I cannot.
I'm having some audio issues. I will resolve it in the next couple minutes. I'll be right back.
Okay, okay. Someone's like to just hold up quickly. Hold up. So I'll just come back. I'll hold up, and while he comes back in, I'll just lend a couple of words. I was going to initially, wait till we're all done and listening to some of the things that Mr. Parth said. Away from moving about the colonization of just mental health itself, to the awareness of it. I think you also went back to seeing something Mr. Omage already brought up. It's the conversation around prevention. And I think that's where the bulk of the work is. So coming in, like you said, a firefighter approach, trying to quench fire when it's already burning up stuff. And even when we are able to rectify these issues, we already lost a couple of properties because the fire just consumes. But one of the things that I really love about the shift is the concept about preventing how and what are the systems we can put in place to consciously take it away. Now going back to Mr. Rashid's conversation around taking it away from just looking like an abstract concept into looking like this is something that we do. I'll give you an example. I was speaking with an elderly person one time, and he said to me, let me say it the right way. This people's mental health thing that people are talking about, people are just looking for an excuse to just be doing anyhow, and I have never, in a lot of times, I had a colleague who came up to me and was like, see, Mr. Mara, I won't be able to come to work. And I was like, why? Mental health is going through a lot of things. And one of the things that came to my mind, first of all, and bringing it to what Mr. Misha said, is how do we transform this thing that looks, Western to sound, Nigerian or to sound African or to fit into our context. And, I'm sure for the Africans that are here, I'm sure you know how that commercial had to go. You say, you go to go check yourself. Because there's saying that I have a mental health issue. I say, this was what the president said, you're mad at me. And I'm like, that's not what she's saying. She's not, and having to. Oh my God.
Okay, I'm sorry. I don't know what I missed, but I'm back.
Okay, thank you. So one thing that, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Right. So I was just saying, as we prepared for was to say that just from the conversation that we've had, there are a lot of things and ways we can get. So over to you. Back to you. The question still remains: what is one thing that whenever you hear about mental health today, that you believe needs to shift urgently in the mental health space?
Yeah, I want to echo, and I don't want to repeat what has already been said. I think that the entire model is Western and Eurocentric. I think that you see it in a country like Nigeria, where we're still following biomedical models, unfortunately, that emphasizes the brain as something that's diseased, and we don't think about psychosocially how we can support wellness and well-being. Something that I hope to maybe discuss a little bit longer, but what I really want to distill on some work that we've been doing with Nigerian mental health in the context of national policy. And so I would kind of delineate three major shifts that we should really see. The first one is that government should stop treating mental health as just a healthcare concern and instead a development and economic priority. I want to circle and start at a development and economic priority. We've seen more attention to this when it comes to economic shocks and resilience, when it comes to surveillance and response, when it comes to productivity, when it comes to workforce participation, when it comes to long-term national development. So we have to reframe the conversation and not just stop at our Ministry of Health, but also think about it in the context of long-term national development and economic infrastructure. The second one is we need integrated care systems. A young person should not have to navigate disconnected institutions just to receive support. So mental health has to be embedded in things like education, primary care, youth development, and community systems. And the third one, in the terms of the policymaking work that we've been doing, is we need a long-term ecosystem investment. And I think Deborah mentioned Lancet a little bit earlier, and some folks have mentioned working with Lancet. There's a Lancet Psychiatry Commission that recently noted that mental health conditions account for almost 45% of the disease burden globally, and yet it only receives a small fraction of the global health budget. In high-income countries, like it's around $65 per person. In low-income countries, it's around 4 cents. Globally, mental health only receives 2% of health budget. So when we think about the right to health as three distinct things, one around physical health that everybody knows about, there's two other things that we don't discuss at all when it comes to the right to health, which is mental health and social health. So if we look at our health budget, it's only 2 to 3% or 2 to 5% from the health budget goes to mental health, then we have a huge problem. One of the things that I'm working on is actually a law in Illinois, and which is starting to make a connection to this idea of long-term investment. This law in Illinois in the United States is the first of its kind. It's called SB 1560, and makes Illinois the first state in the United States and likely the world, the first jurisdiction in the world to mandate universal cost-free mental health screenings for students grades 3 to 12. Now, we've had patch marks of this, but we have not had universal health screenings for youth in one place, in one jurisdiction that we see worldwide. Why does something like this matter? Because it helps generate that information at scale, something that has not existed before, which is systematic population data on where student mental health needs are concentrated. And so if it works in this state, like it's going to start in 2026 and 2027, then it understands that this scarce resource is where they should necessarily be allocated. And if done well, it can become a proof of concept. So advocating for some of these universal screening tools to try to see where we can channel these precious budgets will go a long way to hopefully making the case of where there's a lot of impact, a lot of concern, and we can really help our individuals, young people. We need to make sure that we're not just caring about youth mental health, as has been said, but we're really thinking about how we build systems that continue caring long after this conference ends and long after these issues we discussed continue to germinate.
Right. Sorry for interrupting you. I'll stick with Chime for a bit just to build on to. We spoke about systems, and that's something I want to point into. What changes what changes need to happen at the systemic level, at the level of systems, for youth mental health support to become sustainable and not just symbolic? I know you spoke about that, the two changes, physical health, mental health, and social health. What are some systemic or systems that need to be put in place or at the system level, to take mental health from just being symbolic to becoming sustainable? Turn it back to you.
I'm going to mention 6 because I think this is important. And I know people are taking notes, so take notes on this. I got a lot of things that you guys should write down because I think that these are important based on Nigerian Mental Health is a network of 50 plus organizations. And we've learned a lot from the best practices that we've curated from our community. And we know that we need to stop thinking about emotional well-being as extracurricular and start thinking it as foundational to learning itself. If we can't expect young people to thrive in academic environments where there's stress, anxiety, trauma, bullying, loneliness, emotional distress are constantly ignored. So if we embed it into our education and other layers where young people interact with, we're going to help. So here is the 6 ways I think that could help in terms of supporting this in the context of systems. The first one is emotional literacy should be integrated into curricula from an early age. So that's helping young people understand emotions, coping skills like mindfulness, relationships, digital well-being, stress management, help-seeking behavior, and things like that. We're starting to see that a little bit in Nigeria. Oyo State State House of Assembly has just passed. That's a state of Nigeria has just passed a resolution to support this. Some members of our network are creating clubs, et cetera, like that, but we haven't mainstreamed this into education systems like we need to. The second is we need to understand that we're educators themselves need support and training. So teachers are often the first adults to notice if a young person is struggling, but many have never been equipped to respond safely or effectively. So we need to make sure that they're trained. Third, we need to make sure that schools need layered support systems. Not every student requires a clinical intervention, but every student benefits from psychologically safer environments, peer support structures, referral pathways, and trusted adults within the system. I'm working with a school right now in Illinois as well that has these sustainable community schools, and they actually embed psychological circles within the school. So it becomes a platform for the community to engage, but also it's right next door to the school so they can make sure that these social behavior licensed social workers can work with the kids, work with the parents, et cetera, as they excel. The fourth one is that, as been mentioned before, we need young people to be participants and not just individuals that are studied. So we need young people to co-design programs that help with things like culturally specific language or engagement protocols or connecting those psychological or mental health challenges with the larger family or things around stigma reduction that can help enhance help seeking. The fifth, I would say, has to do with aesthetics. And this is something that we don't usually talk about. And I'm going to say it one more time, which is aesthetics of our environment. People believe that you just walk into a space and experience it neutrally, which is not the case. People from all over the world, just to use easy examples, there's a reason why in protests, they tear down statues sometimes, right? Because the statues give a certain context and value system. There's a reason why, especially in the African context, every time you walk into a government office, you see the picture of the president and the picture of the governor and the picture of the parastatal head, because there's a conveying of power. Aesthetics matter for how people experience an environment. And we don't often talk about the inside of our experience, of our environments to signal things that we think are important, like wellness or community or connection or inclusion. So these are things that we can have. At my law school, I have a doctorate in law. I went to Northwestern. This is something I experienced personally. I went into my law school and I saw essentially older white men as embodying what the law meant. I didn't see pictures of social justice or disability or feminist rights. I didn't see articulation of what social change would look like to an inner city kid or to the human rights struggles across the world in Africa. Those depictions and those images helped create an environment that enhanced my entire well-being. And now Northwestern, 10 years later, has aesthetic portraits that they have individuals walk through to get a sense of community and connection and belonging that helps. And that thing is helped by co-sponsorship of fellowships where individual young people can decide how can you make this environment more inclusive, more whole. So the aesthetics of our environment is important. And then the sixth and final thing is prevention must become measurable. Prevention become measurable. And I'll emphasize this in another in letter points, but it's very key. We have to shift what we value. Educational success should not just be evaluated through things like exam performance or grades, but we should start tracking upstream indicators around well-being. In practice, what could this mean? There's a this has been deployed by a non-clinical measurement tool called the Warwick Edinburgh Mental Health Being Scale to audit school climate annually. And instead of waiting for crisis data like school dropout or self-harm or mortality, it measures proactive indicators like, do students feel a sense of belonging? Can they identify at least 2 trusted adults on campus? Do they demonstrate improved emotional regulation scores after the literacy curriculum that we discussed above? Because education systems do not just shape intelligence, they also shape a young person's resilience, belonging, identity, and human well-being. We need to equip individuals to emotionally navigate life. Education systems don't just shape these things, they shape all aspects of our identity and our well-being.
Thanks so much, Chime, for those 6 powerful points. You would do a lot. Please can we just give you a round of applause for that? Thank you. Those were very key. I want to say, like, a lot of times when we speak, I can hear the passion. I'll hold up. I'll link something you said to Mrs. Rashid, just to be able to get her thoughts on something. Parth, I'll be with you in a bit, so I don't want her to not talk for a long time. Right, so I'll send this to Mr. Rashid. One of the things that Chime spoke about, and when spoke about aesthetics, I also just wrote it down as relatability. And if I link it up with some of the things that you said, having mental health to fit into the African culture, to fit into not just Africa in itself, but fit into cultures and systems that everyone who cares about mental health can relate to. So this is my question to you: what role do you think community-led and culturally, grounded approaches, play in making mental health support more accessible to young people? I'll take that again. What role do you think that community-led and culturally grounded approaches, play in making mental health support more accessible to young people? And Chime already broke into that a little bit. And what I wrote here is that it's almost saying, making, how young people make things for young people. So, and I think that's one of those things that tells, and that's my question for you, Ms. Rashid. Ms. Rashid, so I'll have you answer that question.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I think I'll answer that question with what I'm currently doing. So as you're reading my bio, there's something that we came up with, like my team worked on, that was before ChatGPT became ChatGPT. And we created, because a lot of Kenyans, and we know that for the knowledge that has been put in these LLM platforms, like ChatGPT and the rest, the AI, the generative AI, most of the young people in Kenya are the ones who made it. So that means that the uptake of ChatGPT in Kenya has been very high. So what we tried is, instead of creating up an app, what the question we were asking ourselves was, what will it look like to just know that people are already going to these platforms already? How can we experiment? Of course, they already have our knowledge and our everything. So it's just like using what they've already put in terms of offering mental health and psychosocial support, guidance, and referral pathway within ChatGPT. So instead of coming up with a new app and everything, like, we designed and built a model within ChatGPT called Amisa GPT. By the way, I didn't ask my team to name it after me, they just did it. So the idea was this, it can guide you and give you referral pathways on where to be able to get mental health and psychosocial support in Kenya. So the first gap was a lot of young people preferred to not go through, because it has the referral pathway to a human being. Like, after going through this, that it could refer you to a therapist or a counselor. And then young people were like, we don't want to deal with human beings, let's just deal with the app. So our work was, how do we make it better? And the second thing that we realized was that a lot of these models do not have the language for mental health for us. So this is it led to another aspect of Nivisha. So Nivisha, the organization that I'm working with, is working on mental health lexicon. And this is the fact that Swahili is the most spoken indigenous African language. We have around 200 million Swahili speakers within East and Central Africa, and none of them have mental health knowledge terminologies in Swahili. Like if I can ask even everyone on the call, what is trauma in their local language, or what is depression in your local language, or what is anxiety? We may have some varied version, but it won't depict the actual meaning of trauma. So if I'm talking to an older person in the village around trauma, it's like a new thing that I'm supposed to explain. So how will we expect young people or people within the community to start understanding mental health when the language itself, it's not understandable to them? So that is what we are working on. Like, how do we come up with Swahili mental health terminologies so that everybody within East Africa in the refugee setups, because in the refugee camps, they speak Swahili. In all these aspects, they don't speak English, they speak Swahili. So how do we make sure that we bring mental health knowledge using the language that is used? So that is one aspect. And once we've gotten the terminologies, like what is trauma in Swahili, what is psychosis in Swahili, what is all these things in Swahili, then we can now use it as a framework for other local languages in Africa to be able to find their own indigenous mental health languages. And also all these chatbot LLMs and all these kind of things can have an actual word, because what we discovered with Amisa GPT is like when I'm asking what is depression in Swahili, it will create a whole new word. So instead of it creating word, why don't we come up and feed it what we know? And as much as I have my reservation about the use of AI and whatnot, it is here with us, and we have to figure out how to be able to use it. So those are the things that I'm saying, that if we don't have the language to talk about healing, we cannot be able to heal. So for the young people also, if we're expecting them to heal, what is the language that they talk about when they're going through mental health issues? How can we be able to make it, use it and make it very cultural sensitive, so that when I'm talking about depression, I'm not seeing it as clinical and something foreign, but I can be able to use it in the local lingo that young people are using.
Thank you very much. This is very relatable. Someone just typed that. I saw somebody's comment say, trauma in my local dialect. Like, you know, when I think about it, and that's very, very relatable, and something that we must look into as one of the things that we must build, you know, into making sure. I'll come back to Parth, Mr. Parth. One of the things that she spoke about was the relatability, you know, of conceptualizing mental health, and this is something that you've done. So let's talk about what do adults and institutions, you know, often misunderstand about mental health, and what do young people, you know, truly need in the way you think about it. So I'll think that again. What do mental health institutions, you know, often misunderstand, or adults often misunderstand about mental health, and what do young people truly need? Over to you, Mr.
That's very interesting. I think I differ and disagree with both Chime and Amisa when it comes to mental health. I think I take more of an abolitionist perspective, which is to say that, yes, there is incremental reform we can do within these systems, but we also need to actively, you know, understand what is beyond these systems and mental health as well. For me, I ask a very important question here, is that when I say that I'm a person of lived experience, and I think a lot of us here would identify with that or have had heard of that within the past couple of minutes, either here or in our ecosystem. Lived experience of what, right? Like, I would add a question mark next to that. I would also say question mark mental health what? What do we understand as mental health? Amisa rightly pointed out that in our languages, at least in our local languages, I relate to that in India as well. We have over 24 languages which are used periodically within official text, but we have more than 1,000 languages which are there within the region as well. So you know how complex India and its geography is. We all perceive mental health as psychosomatic symptoms or physical representations of what it looks like, right? So when someone talks about feeling anxious, they're not talking about anxiety as a word or a mental health symptom, but they're talking about feeling a heart palpitation within their own body, or they're feeling unrest or uneasy. But this is also reserved to people who have that access to language, etc. Right? Beyond that particular group, I would also ask mental health question mark, what do we actually mean by that? Where I come from, when I look at it from the Trauma Foundation's perspective, we actively push for understanding the intersections between oppression, right? There is no single issue life that any of us lead. So what does it mean for someone who's going through gender-based violence? would gender-based violence not constitute as mental health, or are we looking at mental health to be an offset of gender-based violence? When we think of trauma, displacement, marginalization, when we think of young people today who are actively within war zones or going through genocide, we think of Sudan, we think of Gaza, we think of what's happening in Ukraine, we think of what's happening in parts of India. What does mental health mean to them? Are we already thinking that, yes, mental health challenges have begun because they're already within those conditions? Or are we thinking of conceptualizing mental health beyond what we've been taught of, which is the biomedical model? I also actively differ from thinking of, mental health to be within school systems. Now, there is this thing in India as well when we're doing intervention design. This is a lot of work that I take part in as well through Sangat, which is a non-for-profit I work at, where we look at task sharing approaches, with what Chime was also bringing up, where we're looking at, not everyone requires a specialist referral, but within school systems, you can often start with task sharing, which is teachers, you can start with school counselors, you can start with support staff, and have different step care models. I go beyond this particular system and ask, what happens to the children who are not in schools? Right? Our perception is that there are a lot of young people who are within school systems and are actively engaged. When you think of the context of India particularly, there is a majority of youth which do not have access to formal education. And even within that, you have the intersections of people who are Dalit, Bahujan, and Adivasi, or people from oppressed castes, who are indigenous, who are actively oppressed within those systems as well. Right? So you're looking at multiple axes of marginalization. But when we think of mental health and we think of youth mental health, we often flatten lived experience to just age. We often flatten lived experience to just access to education. And we're not looking at intersecting markers of oppression. But what happens to someone who is within a family system where they're going through domestic violence? What happens, again, when we think of colonialism, when we think of anti-colonial practices, we also question what colonialism has left us with. A lot of the times when I'm doing political education workshops, we go back to telling people, look at why beating is such a normalized thing within a lot of our cultures, right? I know Deborah and I've spoken about this in the past, the similarities between Nigerian culture. I'm sure like Amisa can also relate from Kenya, that beating and corporal punishment is a very normalized culture. But that comes in from the colonization that a lot of our countries faced, where people who were from our communities were actively enslaved and beaten up to fit a certain European white norm. And that is a practice that we have now institutionalized within our systems as well. It's the same way when we look at tone policing, we look at hair. Now, you don't see the curls right now, but some of you who know me personally know that I have a big curly afro. And that has been pathologized and discriminated against in India quite a lot. I was in university, which is a very Christian university, but a conservative Christian university that actively restricted us to have hair like that because it didn't fit professional standards. Now, I'm not saying that was oppressive by any means because I have a lot of privilege in comparison to the others, but here I'm still talking about the fact that we view hair and hair texture in contemporary India, in today 2020 India, as something which is not professional, right? Because it doesn't fit a white European standard. So there are some things about your outlook, some things about your presentation that can be discriminated against. Think about the long terms when you're thinking of mental health as well. What happens to someone who is queer trans? Today in India, actively 2 months ago, there was anti-trans legislation that completely erased identities from people like mine who are from the non-binary or trans community entirely. Which means now there is active legislation that we don't exist within the laws of India. Can someone come and tell me what mental health would mean to someone like me? What mental health would mean to someone who is further oppressed, who is also queer, trans, and disabled? I think I pushed the narrative a little beyond just schools. I pushed the narrative a little beyond digital access as well. And speaking to what Amisa said, we have a lot of digital interventions in India as well. We have a lot of AI-supported digital interventions for mental health. Sometimes we think of this being an equalizer. But in India, in rural parts of India, in a very patriarchal, paternalistic family, there is often only one cell phone and only one cell phone with a data plan, which means that the patriarch, or the father in the family, often has that phone. If there are multiple children in the family, the girls or children who are younger are rarely afforded the opportunity to have the phone or have the phone for a long enough time that they can do something on it. Who is the access for, right? When we're talking about access and we're talking about digital interventions, who did they go towards? Or have we now reduced our tunnel vision to only people that work within these communities and everyone else is out of scope? So I sort of, when I'm working with the Trauma Foundation as well, we actively challenge the way that we are currently being taught mental health. Also, what decolonial mental health would look like. And beyond that, what are some of the abolitionist futures that we can imagine? What happens when mutual aid? What happens when supporting communities becomes a way of looking at mental health? What happens when we think of mental health from the aspect of, again, gender affirming care? What happens when we look at mental health in education and so on and so forth? So I think it's important for us to look at mental health institutions and adults to recognize that we can't flatten lived experience to just age, as if age is the determining factor. Yes, for a lot of us in our countries, age is a determining factor, but it's not the only axis of oppression that we need to look at when we're thinking of mental health.
Thanks so much, Parth, for that. I'm going to quickly rush on because of our time. and stop adding the commentary. I'll stick with you, Parth, so that I can, join this together. I'm looking back at your experience, and now I'm coming towards education. One of the things that we have narrowed down into is, school conversations about, education, secondary schools particularly, or high schools to fit into the context. Looking back at your experience, what kind of mental health educational support do you wish that young people had access to earlier? You spoke about. Let me allow you to answer that question for you.
No, that's a very fair question. I think let's talk about people who are within schools. For the time being, at least with my response, let's hope that everyone that we're talking about is within a school system, right? What would they benefit from? One thing we think of is social-emotional learning, cues of mental health, teaching people that reaching out for support matters. But I think here we're also still teaching people that the firefighting response is what we need to do. That a young person needs to reach out for support or mental health. If they know the language, they'll reach out. But that's not really the case, right? When you look at data that comes out of these schools, oftentimes people who are with common mental health conditions, going back to the biomedical model of it all, reach out in ways that are acceptable. What happens to people who are going through sexual abuse? What happens to people who are going through intimate partner violence? What happens to people who are self-harming? What happens to people who are being bullied beyond compare because of their gender or sexual identity? Sometimes we reduce our mental health awareness to just mental health literacy as if giving a language will suddenly teach people how to communicate using that language. That's not true, right? We can all have the language of mental health, but if young people don't have avenues to speak out, when young people don't have safe spaces to be in, that language is not going to get used. So when we're thinking of schools as well, I think we need to go beyond just mental health literacy and actively create spaces. And I'm not talking about mental health spaces, because again, going back to the stigma that I think all of us recognize within our own systems, creating a specialized mental health club is again exclusionary because it already has a tag of a mental health club that already adds stigma further. I'm talking about what happens within sports settings, what happens within locker rooms, what happens within libraries, right? Are there any spaces? Is it very visually present that yes, mental health is a conversation that we can talk about, but at the same time, we're talking about gender, we're talking about race, we're talking about colorism, we're talking about racism, we're talking about misogyny, and more of these intersecting oppressive markers that people learn. So when there was a conversation about men's mental health earlier as well, right? Are we teaching men not to be oppressive from a very early age? Are we teaching them about misogyny? Are we teaching them about patriarchy and its effects? Or are we giving people who are affected by abuse a language of mental health to say, well, once you've gone through something traumatic, you can go reach out for help? So I think the lens that we take also needs to differ in what spaces we are creating within schools and universities. There are a lot of school mental health programs today that are actively using the basic ingredient approach of CBT, which is to say that we take out either problem solving or we take out one version of the cognitive behavioral therapy that can help children. Yes, in some cases, there is evidence that it does support people, but I think I'm going to push everyone here to think beyond that, right? Someone who is going through poverty in their homes, who's coming to the school, potentially could not retain school, will have to potentially leave and start working at a very young age, which is a very present reality in India, by the way. Will CBT reframing their thoughts of problem solving support their mental health beyond that particular moment? Or are we looking at material changes that can happen within the family systems? At the same time, someone who's seeing intimate partner violence in their own family or someone who's seeing substance abuse in their own family, can mental health change only through school-based intervention? We need to realize that children or young people in schools are not the only people we need to be working with when we take a holistic approach to school mental health as well, right? Can we talk to administrative staff? Can there be mental health policy for the faculty, for the teachers, for the school itself? Or are we now using task sharing as another approach to burden the teachers who are already overworked, underpaid, and without resources to say, you have all of your problems with here, become the counselor to the child as well, right? So now, beyond just doing your role as an educator, create a safe space and also take on the role of a counselor. I think I push for us to imagine beyond just literacy, what would be the next step? What would it mean to actually do holistic systems integrated work with the families? And again, going back to policy as well, to have these rights safeguarded. If young people today don't have safeguards within policy itself, we can keep pushing for so much that will never translate. Long-winded answer, but yeah.
Thanks so much, Parth, for that. You spotted a lot of observation. Please come and just give me a round of applause for that. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm just recreating scenarios. This is not an easy conversation to host, honestly. I have a lot of comments. Well, let's go. Let's move on. So I'll come to Miss Amisha Rashid for a question. Then after that, I'll pose a question to Mr. Chime and I know that we're going to quickly wrap up. But now to Ms. Rashid. So one of the things that Parth spoke about was And one thing I took out from that conversation which leads to this question is these laws or this advocacy or this support that we're going to provide cannot just be only in schools. They have to be able to be structured, within the government, policies, and Chime spoke about that, greatly. But I want you to lean into that, and you also spoke about the concept of languages, because Parth also spotted out something very beautiful. It's great to have a language, but now that there can be stigma to that language while I go into school. I'm sure we all knew how it was back in high school or secondary school, how there's some certain things you had to avoid, because once you had either gone through that route, you had labeled that for the rest of your life. So what are some, and my question to you, Ms. Amisa, is how can schools, not just only schools now, youth groups, communities, family or community spaces, become places where young people can feel emotionally safe, understood, and most importantly, I think within this bridge is supported.
I think when it comes to that question, it also depends with which context are we talking about? Because I think one of the key thing about taking interventions from the Euro-American perspective of mental health is we treat everything from just a monolithic perspective. So what will work in Kenya, I actually assume that it will work in Nigeria, but the mental health needs for Kenyans and Nigerians are totally different. Mental health needs for somebody, even in Nairobi itself, in Kenya itself, mental health need for me living in Nairobi and mental health of somebody living in Mombasa, the coastal area, or another part of Kenya is totally different. So what it goes back again to the thing that Parth mentioned earlier on, who gets to decide what mental health should look like for us, right? Because most of the mental health knowledge and information, again, is also coming from the biomedical perspective. So if I'm supposed to actually even come up with, to talk about social emotional language, learning, let's say in schools, I'll need, first of all, the language that I've said earlier on. Even after the language, where am I going to get the support from, even after knowing how to express myself? And also, apart from that, how do I make sure that the thing that I'm going through is supported as I'm going through the whole journey of it? So it goes back to individual perspective of what does mental health look like for each and every one of us. I'm not saying that every one of us should define what mental health looks like, but just having that aspect of what would interventions look like when we don't treat mental health as just one thing, as just an homogeneous thing, and just try to actually go back to individuality and say, okay, this is what mental health looks like for me as a Muslim woman who is diverse, who comes from an ethnically marginalized community. What does it look for another person? And then in Kenya and in other aspect. And then the other thing when it comes to that is policies. I can give you a good example that links all of these things together. Last year in Kenya, January 2025, because I was part of the group that made sure that suicide is no longer a crime. If you go to all African countries or all British colonies, you'll find that suicide is a crime. Attempting suicide is a crime. Just attempting suicide. Like in Kenya, before January 2025, if you are found attempting suicide, you'll be jailed for 2 years. Right? So what were the policies? And these are archaic. We don't know. We just came. We found out that if we have a mental illness and we have suicide ideation or we tried attempting suicide, it's not seen as from the mental health justice lens, it's seen from the criminal justice lens. So immediately I'm taken to the prison. And the only way we could change that, even if we had the language, because before that we changed, we are like, don't talk about committing suicide, talk about like dying by suicide. We had the language, yes, but at the end of the time, the systemic change, the policies were still there. So we had to change the policies first to make sure that suicide is no longer a crime. It will be treated as a mental health issues. And those people who are in prison currently because of attempting suicide are taken out of the prison. So there is that intersectionality. And as much as we can try to do the work that we do, I know that the most I can do is work with the mental health context in Kenya I cannot deny the fact that in order for us to make big steps, we really need to have like the systematic and policy changes. And in Kenya, we know ourselves, we have the best policies, but when it comes to implementation of those policies, like there are zero implementation. So how do we make sure that we're not just talking about policies, but we're implementing it? At Nivisha, we are working on maternal mental health. We don't have a maternal mental health policy. So we know that even if we come up with the best intervention ever, if the government does not acknowledge the fact that maternal mental health is a crisis and need a policy to be supported it, our work will be zero. So that is how, like, just seeing like a mental health from a social justice lens. And if you see it from a social justice lens, you'll see that it will need systematic justice change to be able to change the whole aspect of mental health. So nothing can work. We know that we cannot be able to bring the change without this system that you're trying to dismantle. But at the moment, this is what we have. So how do we make sure that we are making the best out of it as we are navigating the aspect of making sure that mental health is accessible, understandable, and cultural sensitive for all of us?
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Shima, for that. Chime, I think you had your hands. I think you signaled to contribute, or was I wrong? Okay. So I have a question for you. Building into systems. One thing that I wanted to pick up from that is I really love what she said about the diversity and how that we cannot replace every statement. And I beg to say, for Nigeria, I think it's not just the same policy across northern Nigeria and southwest. The things that bedevil us in the north is totally different from somebody like Chime who was actively working in Abia State. If you go to Lagos, the traffic alone it's going to mess with your destiny. So that's a lot of things that diversity. But looking at this now, and this for Chime, what would it look like for mental health literacy and prevention to be embedded in the educational system, and also I would like to add in policy making, rather than it being treated like an extra conversation? Because now, whenever we bring up this conversation around the educational system, one of the things that happens, which I know it's a beautiful step to take, but for me, it's almost leaving mental health behind, is we are bringing in mental health as youth clubs. And I really love what Parth said. There's already so these are the people, and I want to use these are people where their mental health no they find at them with that, and you don't want to be there, to bring that. For somebody who I have a very good background in art and music. There's something called a literature club that we could bring up conversations from literature class and bring into that. There's something like a science club from whatever happened at the physics lab or the chemistry lab. We could bring it in and build some practicality about it. And that's what I'm asking. What are some of the things that we can do that, especially around education, that mental health prevention, it's literacy, and literacy rather can be brought in and not just treated as an extra conversation and not just clubs or policies on its own. How can it seep into education, family, and all of its life? Teaching.
Okay. Forgive me. I want to take a little bit of panelist liberties and talk about what I really want to talk about, because I've been inspired by the comments from my two panelists, and they're making me think. And I think that what I'm thinking about is more interesting than the response I would give to that answer to that question. So I'm going to forget that and actually talk about what I really want to talk about. And I want to pose this question to Parth and then make a response to Amisa and then talk for a little bit. What interests me around what Pat talked about is I agree with it. And that's why some of the conversations I talked about in terms of aesthetics and space and things like that are important. What I'm thinking about is in the context of engaging the political. And so what happens in a lot of these conversations is that the discussion around flattening of identity and only being connected to education and age, et cetera, like that, usually is used as an argument concerning solvency. So will this intervention work, or is it obscuring the total nature of the challenge, if that makes sense? And that's some of what I heard. What I don't hear often when it comes to this conversation is, does it make it actively worse? And this is what I would ask Pat to talk about in a response. when we think about either colonial methods, when we think about intimate partner violence, some of the things that you mentioned don't fit in neatly in the ledger. When we talk about racism, casteism, et cetera, like that, we're talking about unemployment poverty, and we think about interventions in the school space. For instance, just as an example, does the non-reimagined or the last abolitionist approach actively make things worse? And I think that's important. And the reason I want us to articulate this in this kind of setting is because I don't think we do it. I think we make the argument kind of that what I hear you said earlier, which is there's some things we're missing. And so a policymaker that you're discussing could say, well, there's some things we're missing, but this is the biggest catchment that we have. Even though in Nigeria we have Omage children and individuals who are come out of poverty, et cetera, like that. So I'm kind of would be curious the response to that. The second thing I was going to say is in response to Amisa is that she mentioned a lot of conversation around social justice. And one of the things of that frame, I think, kind of gives me allusion to what Pat was saying in terms of there's these broader social systems and how they impact things around mental health. And I think there's a tension here for what I might recommend and a tension here for how we should think about broader social justice. I think that I would probably prefer a more nuanced, a more narrow and or nuanced version about how we should talk about things around social justice and say not social justice, but disability justice, because I don't think that we make that connection often. And I think that we should, for important, I don't think that we should obscure the language of mental health and the language of larger disability. I think is really important for our conversation and movement. I'll talk about disability justice in particular right now. So mental health is the largest cause of disability. It counts for more than 17% of all disability worldwide. This has been re-echoed from research from Harvard, the World Health Organization, but most recently in 2023, there's something called the Global Burden Disease Data. And I think we need to be framing this conversation because a lot of our, especially low-income countries, but especially in Nigeria, the biggest battles you're having is conversations around whether mental health is a disability in the first place and how it obscures things. We had an electoral act in Nigeria, and one of the vanguards of that electoral act was to do things around disability, but those disabilities eluded things around mental health. And so the things like crisis hotlines, things like social support for those to adequately participate in the mental health contact who have mental health conditions was obscured. And so that's a conversation after the fact because it's not it's not connected to the larger question of accessibility. In Nigeria, we have a recently passed prohibition against persons with disabilities. One of the institutions that is created is something called the National Commission of Persons with Disabilities, which has the 6 electoral individuals within the continuum and one person who's the executive director. None of those individuals have a mental health condition. So they only have physical disabilities, things like, blindness or not being able to walk, et cetera, like that. So not connecting to the larger question of accessibility, I think, is a challenge. And when we think about this in larger ableist concerns, right? Ableism defines who's valuable, who's not, and who's at the table, who's not. So if you frame in the context of accessibility, then I think that, and disability justice writ large, I think that will be further. There's and other things. It doesn't have to be just disability justice, but I think we need to talk about as activists or proponents more about the connection, especially when it comes to gender. So I think that this is tragically ignored often. Amisa mentioned suicide prevention. We're working on suicide prevention efforts in Nigeria right now. We helped get the first Mental Health Rights Act passed. We have a suicide prevention law that is now in the National Assembly that we're advocating for. And one of the things we found from BMPJ data is that societies where suicide is criminalized, there is increased rates of suicide amongst women, something we don't think about. Because often when we're talking about suicide prevention or support efforts, we're thinking about help seeking and data collection. We're not talking about in the context of mortality or gender. And that's an entire catchment of individuals that would be interested in the struggle that would be there. There's also data from the CDC. The CDC is the Center for Disease Control in America. It found something that was very interesting. It found that underlying mental health conditions had become the leading cause of pregnancy-related deaths. I'm going to say what I said again. In America, the leading cause of pregnancy-related deaths is now has to do with mental health and substance abuse. It accounted for 27.7, almost 30% of suicide, of mental health cases, nearly half that determined late postpartum years. So we need to connect those issues to larger questions of gender violence as well. Why do I say this is important? And maybe if I have one final comment, it'll be important to discuss. We are not framing things in the context of language where these things have been considered higher in the context of mortality and not mortality. So even if we're talking about different social stratifications, different mechanisms of oppression, if we don't have a language around trauma or mental health or depression, things that have been mentioned today, then they're not elevated. And so we continue to see the cyclical cycle of less funding going to these things, or less mental health crisis response times and things like that. So I just think it's something for to think about. I'd be curious what the other panelists have to say, especially Pat, because I think that it's important for advocates in a setting like this to have that context when we have these discussions.
All right, Chime, thank you very much for your, as much as you evaded my question, thank you so much for, bringing in, your thoughts on that. I think you went on to, still write on some of the things that I brought up, but because of our time and we're really trying to be able to stick with that part, I know you really want to lend a voice to,
Yes.
To this, but so Parth, I'm going to be slightly
Please let him respond. We want to hear.
Slightly strict with time, so I'm going to give you thumbs up. I'm like,
Don't worry. Don't worry, I will keep it brief. But I think what I will mention is that, yeah, Chime, you're right about that. Definitely. I think we see that in India as well in terms of how policy and policymakers tend to shift the discourse on, how laws get into place. And India, going back to Amisa, just to give a little bit of historical context as well, going back to Amisa's point, suicide was decriminalized in India a while ago. But again, because of the movements where India today has the highest rate of youth suicide, which are also gendered indifferently when it comes to age, when it comes to caste, disability, and so on and so forth. But I think what a lot of people tend to forget, and this is not taught within these movements or not brought up within activism at all, even more, is that why was suicide criminalized to begin with, right? If you go back and look at the transatlantic slave trade, look at what is happening in a lot of our countries and contexts in the history, was that suicide prevention came in from a white colonial construct of keeping slave labor alive on ships. When people who were enslaved wanted to end their lives and that of their family, wanted to jump off ship, so the saying of jumping off ship, they were chemically restrained, they were physically restrained, force-fed, and kept alive. So the history of suicide prevention comes in from this place. So when a lot of, at least within the context of India and within the context of Asia, when a lot of, for the lack of a better word, people who are racialized as white come in with suicide prevention, ideologies as to why things are not changed, I sort of bring them back to their own histories and say, are any of us even discussing the fact that it was always about late-stage capitalism, it was always about labor that we provided to the empire? And even today, when we think about suicide prevention, a lot of the idea of productivity then comes in from there, right? That was just some context that I wanted to mention in comparison to Amisa. But actually, going back to you, absolutely. I think that's a conversation that happens in India as well. But what I constantly talk about is, in India, we have a government cycle which is extremely authoritarian and fascist. It is in comparison to what is happening in the States right now with Trump. So we have ethnic religious fascism, which is based on the Hindutva violence. Now, who do they deem expendable? Who do they deem, whose deaths don't matter? This is where the vote bank politics comes into place. In India, there is a new education policy where the fascist Indian government has mentioned mental health a dozen times, which is the first time that is happening in Indian law in the last couple decades. That has never happened, that mental health has been mentioned so many times. Yet the implementation of that will never go into place because of the fascism that is there. So even in India, when we're doing policy advocacy, it's made incredibly difficult for us to go to policymakers because they have certain groups that are more likely to be witnessed, certain groups that are more likely to be foregrounded. So you have to sort of be the perfect victim that, this is a child from an impoverished background, from an education institute, from a culture, religion, ethnic minority that you prefer, that is part of your vote bank politics that can push for change. And what happens when the child is not deemed suitable enough for propaganda? So in India, that happens, and I continue to think that's definitely a thing that helps in policy. We've seen that in a lot of different cases as well. I think of abolition to say what happens beyond. What happens when governments don't view us as important enough? When I think of queer trans people today, and I'm going back to gender here since you brought that, trans people have been expendable now, right? Trans people are no longer part of the vote bank electoral politics, even though we occupy the smallest minority of gender within the country. And India has cultural and religious trans identities as well, which are now favored based on the government, based on the fascism of the government as well. I know you're giving me a thumbs up, but I'm going to wrap it up. Yeah. So my question comes into the place that when we are prioritizing mental health to come from the axis of policymakers, we've already at some level betrayed communities that are not deemed worthy enough of electoral politics. So yes, while that is important, can we think of things beyond that as well? So it's not as either or, it's a plus and, yes, we're doing this. Plus, how do we ensure that our communities who are not deemed important enough for electoral vote banks are also actively represented and their struggles are also maintained? And I'm going to give you the thumbs up and I'm going to come back to you. Yeah.
Thank you, Parth, for that. I'm sure Chime, I've satisfied you. I've tried. Thanks so much for that. And I don't just think this question was actually directed to Chime alone. I think so. This cuts across all of what we're summing up. One of the things that you said, and I'm trying to really hold up on my commentaries is not is a plus and it's what are we doing and what are we adding to what we're doing. And just to round it up, please, we're going to have a picture and then I'm going to wrap up this particular conversation. So please, Mrs. Suzanne, please you can put on your camera and Amira, you can also do that. And let's just have all the speakers, have their cameras turned on while we allow the admins to take a picture. And then I'm sure that will enable us to move up and wrap up the panel. So this is a directive by, as Chime said, Malga has asked me to do this. So please, let's just have that. So I don't know if Mrs. Suzanne is still on the call. Fox, if she's still on the call. Yes, I'm going to get to questions shortly. I can see your question in the chat. For Deborah, I don't see Mrs. Fox on the call. I don't know if she's still here, but if you're here, please turn on your camera while we take up the. So
she said on the chat that she's still here.
Yes, thank you. I've seen you. Thank you. So please, yeah. Then we're going to take the picture quickly as we move up. Thank you. A few seconds. I almost forgot. I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you. Are we good? Debbie, give me a thumbs up if we're good.
Yes, very thumbs up. Okay.
Very, very much. All right, so I'm going to wrap up the conversation. I have a lot of questions to ask. This is even away from my follow-up questions. I have a lot of things to ask. Someone who just even listens in the back corner. But one of the things that I want to pose as an extra conversation for us tonight is that is one thing that I want to ask all the panelists to lend the question a statement to is this particular question. One action. What is one action? And I think we'll allow ladies first to persist this time. So I will allow Ms. Michelle to go first, Chime will go next, and then Parth will wrap it up. So what is one question, and what is one action rather, that you hope comes out of this conversation? So you can put it as one action, you put it in this way. One action I hope comes out of this conversation is, and you fly. So ladies first.
Okay, so one action that I hope that will come out of this conversation is the aspect of redefining what mental health looks like for us in our context and our cultures and our languages.
Thank you very much, Chime.
One thing I hope that comes out of this is that you guys follow us at Nigerian Mental Health. If we can put it in the chat, we need support. And if you amplify our story, then we can go, we can expand our work, our visibility, what we're doing, and hopefully, and you can follow me myself if you want to learn a little bit more about what my thoughts are. If you want to contact me or reach out, I'm on Chime, Asonye, on everything. And the second thing is, I have been thinking about something. Sorry, Marwa, sorry to do this. I have been thinking about something, and I have to share it because I've been thinking about this for a week. And so I'm just going to share it very quickly. It goes back to this idea of a language that helps elevate mental health. and a vocabulary. So I'm just going to mention 7 things, not 7 phrases that I've been thinking about that I think helps elevate the dignity, the connectedness, and people can think about this, and I would love reactions. You can reach out to me, but here's the 7 for activists that I think are important. The first one is psychic trauma. The second one is emotional devastation. The third is deep alienation. The fourth is shattered identity. The fifth is robbed agency. The sixth is loss of meaning. And the 7th is chronic hopelessness. And I think that these, having a language to express our pain, to express psychological toll, is something that we need. Often in these conversations, I hear us talk about in trauma, grief, and anxiety, and that's the end of it. But I think that we need the vocabulary that helps us outweigh some of these other policy issues that we're dealing with. So I would love to hear what people think about this in terms of mental health as an existential crisis, as a language that continues to allow these things to be potent, reactions, suggestions, et cetera, like that, because this is the first time I've kind of unveiled these 7. And yes, to help our work and what we can do in the future.
Thanks so much, Chime. Parth, over to you.
I think, one thing that needs to come out of this conversation is for everyone here to realize that you don't need to be in our positions with organizations or in policy to make a change. That all of you can actively start archiving your own experiences of health, discrimination, oppression, education, and that in itself is an act of resistance. So the moment I hope you go after this conversation, you have some time, start archiving what you have learned about your own histories, about your own people, about your own communities, and that in itself can make change. So yes, while a lot of us have power within our own organizations, remember that you at an individual level can also facilitate change. And we're all here to support you for that.
All right, thanks so much, Parth, for that. I'll also give the opportunity to Ms. Suzanne. One thing that you love, us take out of this conversation.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. First of all, that panel was fantastic. And I think the one takeaway, as what Deborah said in the beginning, was we don't want this to be a one and done. I think it'd be great to all, when we leave, find each other on LinkedIn, deepen the connections, keep talking, keep sharing, keep growing, keep learning from each other. So really, really fantastic, really inspiring. And I'm really just excited to keep moving forward with all of you.
All right, thank you, Deborah, Omage. Thanks so much, Ms. Suzanne Fox, for that contribution. Deborah, Omage, what's one thing that you will want to take home from this conversation?
Thank you. I think I'm just going to re-echo the same thing I said when we started this conversation. It should not just be one-off, okay? And we ought to move beyond awareness. I think at this point, I get very agitated when I hear awareness. So it's time to move beyond that and actually do things that, are more action focused, putting our hands on the ground in the dirty soil to get things done and not just shout awareness.
All right, thank you so much. While we round up the conversation, so please can we just give a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you, Parth. Thank you, Chime. Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you also, Michelle, for lending your conversations. I'm writing. I wish I can show you my paper. My handwriting, is for people who sign big checks. Yeah, so I'm just writing a lot and taking a lot of things to work on and how I can build around my conversation around radio. So I'm going to reach out to us, sometimes to have a conversation around radio. But away from that, I will also, open up the comment section for us to be able to lend in throw in our questions, and then reflections from what we have said. So please, I would just like some comments to come in if you have questions. And please, what you do for me is, I know I not be able to take up all of this, but one of the recommendations I'll work with personally with MHT is we're going to build up either an Instagram live conversation with one of the hosts. So we're going to bring up some of those conversations, questions that were not answered here tonight, I'm going to build on them to make them proper build-ups for conversations. Right. So okay. So while the questions come up, I'll just allow us to ask the questions right now. So if you have questions, how I would love it, how it's going to be easier, for me is permit me. So how this will be easier for us to work is you can just write in your questions and tag it in. But so you're trying to ask Parth a question, you're trying to ask Chime a question, you're trying to ask, I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thoughts right now. So if you have questions for all the speakers, you can just be able to ask that in there, quickly.
Before that happens, can I just say something? Yeah.
Yes.
I'm gonna have to, I was just gonna say my brain is sort of shutting off. It's middle of the night here. It's literally midnight in India right now. So I'm gonna just say a quick bye and thank you to Deborah. If there are any questions, Deborah, you can also share details and folks can reach out. But this was a lovely conversation. And Chime and Amisa and I work already together in different contexts. Amisa, you're gonna hear from me soon. But Chime, we're gonna chat soon, discuss more. And Suzanne, always a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Cool,
Thank
folks.
you so much.
I'll have to drop off. Cool. But bye-bye.
All right. Thank you so much, Parth, for joining us in tonight's today's and this long night for you. Thank you so much. Hope to having the
Bye-bye.
Q&A session with you to answer some of these questions. Thank you. All right. So before we wrap it up, we're going to have Michael Kakande speak with us a little bit. I'm going to allow him to come up. I wish I can see if he's on.
Yeah, sure. I'm on. Well, definitely, I've been very blessed. I've been listening in, and myself, I've been making notes, because apparently we do a lot of work on mental health in Africa. So it's been a blessing, definitely, to listen in and be furnished with all this very important information. But just to remind us and everyone on call, I was once told by one of African presidents who told me, Michael, mental health is a political issue. If we ever give you what you needed, then the global north will crash, definitely. We will look into so many things. Reparations, literally everyone will go for them. So he vividly told me this during one of the meetings I was having. And also just to highlight that, there are lots of, should I call them gaps within the whole mental health space, just like the awesome panelists that have really presented to us. And for me, what really stands out is, this week, I think 2 days ago, I was with the UNFCCC ACE team, which is Action for Climate Education, and I vividly asked them where the whole mental health as a standalone was within their whole education packaging, and they both looked at me and they're like, "Yo, Michael, that's something we are missing." So there are lots of things that are still a work, and I think this is where we come in, definitely. And of course, that is the meeting I was having with one of, I think she's the COP31 youth champion in Nairobi. So it was very interesting because in the hall there were some government people. So as they were speaking, I waited. They were packaging their stuff. So I asked this question because I know they didn't have any such a thing. So I think before us is a very long journey. But of course, it's these very important little steps that we are taking, just like being on this call today, that will probably help bring about change. I know this is something very political. Trust you me, it's very political. We've been doing this for some time. I remember, I think it was towards COP30, where we had managed to influence the Africa group of negotiators' position, where we had a standalone on mental health. You should have seen how countries jumped on us. They literally wanted to finish us, young as we are. We're like, hey, okay, we understand. So they had to go back, agree until they generalized it as, health. don't put anything mental health here. You bring lots, it's going to be cost inflicting on our economies, where we understand that in Africa, it's literally one psychologist, that will have to cover like 100,000 young people on the continent. So it's a very big political issue, but I'm glad that, we're having these conversations. It's these very little intentional actions that really bring about change within our communities. So thank you for the awesome panelists. I've known some because I've been following their works. So it is interesting to also listen in on them and, make my notes my end, and definitely will be a guide to all these other initiatives that we could probably build on in the lead up to COP32. I'm not so sure about COP31, but I think in Africa, there's so much preparations for COP32. And this is where these voices really need to be at the center of these discussions, because it's so needed, more so in these times where we are facing lots of geopolitical stuff and, all these crises that, are pushing us further into these issues that we are so much dealing with. So thank you so much for having me today, and for the awesome panelists. I've been blessed my end. I've been listening, making notes here as well with my, doctor, writing. But I've really been blessed, and definitely I hope to move forward with this conversation, definitely, because I'm really sure we can come up with something very tangible. So thank you so much.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Michael Kakande. So I was going to read out your bio, but I didn't want to interrupt you. Mr. Michael Kakande is a certified climate reality leader and the co-lead on the ongoing petition for the advisory opinion on state obligation in response to climate crisis at the African Court on Human Rights and People Rights, an impact maker spearheading climate justice in Africa as recognized by that's COP co-presidency and the UNFCCC high-level champions. Thank you very much, Mr. Michael. I like how you were holding up. I shouldn't read out your whole bio. Also, he's named one of the top 100 most influential Africans. I knew that was the part you are.
No. All these things don't matter. Honestly, they don't matter. We are all leaders in our own rights. These are just I don't know what, but they don't really matter in life. It's these very small actions that we do that are very deliberate about bringing change that really matter. Titles, these things that we are called out there don't really matter. So just to encourage every young leader on the call, you're a leader, you can create as much change as anyone has, and power is in our hands today to bring about, we are calling for UN reforms, UNFCCC reforms, and I think we all have a part to play and a role to play. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Michael. I really like how humble you are. There's something I have an admin who says, you have we can be so humble, but we know who we really are. That's how our end thing is. So thank you so much for everyone who's been with us. We're gradually coming to the end. So I'm going to quickly go to the comments. We are far beyond our time, but I will, stick to my initial, statements. Okay, so yes. Okay. There's a question here by Tinuade. Good day, please. I would like to know whether the Amisa, I think my Yoruba tongue is stepping into my pronunciation. The Amisa GPT is available to everyone, or is it just for those in Kenya? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? If you can, Samuel. Or is she still on the call? Okay. So we're going to bring up. Let me look for any other questions for Chime or Parth. I think Chime gave us a proper lecture. So in case you have questions for him, it means you are not writing. So that one, we're putting in the right place. Thank you, Chime. So while we bring this closer to the end, we have. Did I hear something? Okay. I'm sure somebody's in my guts.
Yeah, I said I can hear you.
Okay, is she still on the call?
Yes,
Okay,
I am.
All right, so you have a question? If I didn't get that. Was that Amisa talking? Okay, I'll just proceed. Thank you. I'm sure you will answer my question if you could hear me. All right, so we're going to wrap it up here. We're going to go closer. We're closer to the end. So we're on our action segment for Beyond Conversation, and I have one of the MHT representatives to lead us through that. I'm going to let Ms. Deborah Omage introduce that person to us properly, and let us have who is going to be speaking with us today from MHT. So, Ms. Deborah, over to you. You're going to let us know who's going to be one of the representatives from MHT to speak with us for the action segment. I know you're trying to avoid speaking. It's literally your organization stuff. Yeah.
Thank you, Maiwa, for putting me on the spot. I appreciate that. Well, we're going to have Stella just quickly come up. Again, everyone, I apologize for, taking our time. We just see how deep the conversation has gone. So Stella will just come up real quick. Stella is the program associate for mental health transformation, and just tell us a little more how we can, proceed beyond this conversation so we don't just leave it as a one-off event and then we call it an evening. Stella, the floor is yours.
First comes in, Chime, thank you so much for being with us. Very much.
Thanks, guys. Everybody have a great day.
Over to you, Stella.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Maiwa, for this opportunity. And really appreciate you for taking our time. I want to appreciate all our speakers. It was indeed a rich and honest conversation. For me, it has been a very challenging topic and conversation as I learned that we can start from where we are. We don't have to wait to have all the resources at our disposal before we can start to create change in our environment. And also, bringing us to this point, I want to encourage all of us that this conversation that we've had today is our speakers didn't come here to just encourage us or to inspire us, but the question remains that after this Zoom call ends, what happens next? That is the question we should ask ourselves. And as we know, this question, MH, the mental health transformation, was built to answer this question. What happens after this conversation, after this talk? What happens next? Mental health transformation started because we believe that awareness is no longer enough. We have been aware of youth mental health crisis for years. We have the statistics and we know the gaps in this sphere. But then what we need to know now is that what people desire, what young people deserve now is transformation, not just talk. But we have to move and build systems that actually work beyond this conversation. And so tonight, we should know that what our speakers have left for us is a beacon on all of us to move by using the insight and knowledge that we have gained from this conversation to create the change we desire to see in our communities. For me particularly, I would say the culturally sensitive mental health that was mentioned by one of our speakers has been like a key takeaway for me. I begin to wonder, okay, what is trauma in my local dialect? I don't even know. I don't even know if there's a word for mental health in my own dialect. I don't know at all. So it's like a challenge for me and it's in fact an assignment for me on that path. And so how do we create change? Now moving beyond this awareness that we have gained, how do we create change? How do we do this? First, we have to stay connected. Everything that was said tonight by our speakers deserves to go beyond this deserves to go beyond this Zoom call. So please, I would like to call on each and every one of us to follow MH, the mental health transformation, all our social media handles, and be part of an ongoing community that takes these conversations further to action and not just leaving the discussion at the table. And secondly, we can also use what exists, like the resources at our disposal. At this point, I honestly want to introduce something very special to us and then place that in your hands as well. Our founder, Ms. Deborah Omage, has written a book, and it's fittingly into our conversation tonight, as the title is called AWAKEN. And so the title of this book actually, what it suggests is a guide. It's a guide crafted to enlighten and empower young people globally, fostering awareness about critical importance of mental health and equipping them to navigate related challenges in mental health. So this book is actually a reminder for us that now is the time for youth like us to awaken, to create change in our environment. And the book covers everything, ranging from understanding our mental health, and also how to create awareness, especially in our own contextual environment. As we know, we are Africans, and not everything, as it was mentioned on this call, that most of the knowledge we have from mental health is from the Europeans, which is Eurocentric. We need to bring mental health to our own local context. By that way, people begin to understand mental health better. And also, the most striking thing about this book is the fact that it contains, it's not just a tool, like it contains other things like guide, advocacy guide. It contains a toolkit to help young people understand their rights when it comes to mental health. And also, we can also find mindfulness and breathing exercises there for us for our daily use. So this is not just a book, it's a tool for us to maximize, to create change in our environment. So what I would like to leave with us tonight is that, whether you're a youth, a young person, you're just trying to figure out things in the mental health space, or you're an educator or a policy expert, and you want to create change in your environment, the book Awaken is a book definitely for you. And you can have access to that by looking out on our social media handle, our newsletter. You can subscribe to that, and that will be made available for each and every one of us on this call tonight. So once again, I would like to say, finally, before I forget, also to create change, we can move beyond this conversation and partner more, because there's it is always said that there's unity in strength, there's strength in unity. So we need to, all hands needs to be on deck when it comes to mental health, especially in the African context. I'm using Africa because we know that mental health is not, the knowledge of mental health is not that prolific in our space. So that's why I like to use the African context. So we can put our hands on deck by partnering with mental health transformation to bring the change we desire to see in our environment and in our community. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Cool.
Well, can we just give a round of applause? Can we just give Stella a round of applause? Thank you so much. While Stella was speaking, Tunade, one of our team members, dropped a couple of dropped a link there for us to be able to access the book, so we can go ahead to access the Awaken book by our founder of MHT, Deborah Omage. So please do also check that out. Also, you can do also follow MHT on all social media platforms. While I say that Stella or Tinade or Derry, if you can help me, just drop the links so that you can either just quickly mention it. Suzanne also mentioned something that we should go ahead to, follow each other up on LinkedIn. So I would like everybody here, to drop in their LinkedIn names or URLs, so that we could, connect with you and build a global village from this conversation. Also, the reason why I'm even asking us to join MHT on social media is because personally, these conversations will extend. We're going to have some of these conversations as Instagram lives or be able to build a roundtable podcast out of these conversations on our YouTube channels. And so from there, spiral into YouTube. But please, I would like you to follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and every other social media platform that will be dropped in the comment box. Right, on behalf of MST, my name is Mayawa Kilanko. It's a great privilege to be your host. I was unable to read out my bio because it doesn't matter. What matters is that you're able to hear me. Apologize about that. Able to hear me and be able to be part of the conversation. Thank you to everyone who joined in, our speakers, and for those of us who just listened through. Mayawa Kilanko is my name. This is Mental Health Transformation. And this is our way to say our community is better with you, and we can only stand together, if we hold each other's hands and look into each other's eyes and walk through the conversation together. Remember that we can't do it alone. Asking for help is a sign of strength, and transformation begins with you. Thank you very much. God bless you for being with us. Stay woke and stay together. Bye.